We've all seen it, parents who might get a little too involved. Tonight you're about to meet a mom and dad waging a sort of class warfare after class.
A lawyer mom who's late to pick up her 6-year-old trades words with a volunteer PTA president.
Hey guys, my name's Brooke and I enjoy reading about true crime, strange occurrences, conspiracy theories, etc. and sharing my findings with like-minded and curious individuals. If you feel that you fit that description, please consider hitting the subscribe button down below. I've been covering a lot of heavier crimes on my channel recently and I figured it was time to switch it up. So today's case is sort of a mix of a season of The Real Housewives mixed with a Lifetime original movie. So if that's the type of thing that you're interested in, you've come to the right place. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into today's case. 49-year-old Kelli Peters grew up near the San Gabriel Mountains in Southern California, where most of the land was taken up by equines and equestrian activities. Although Kelli was farther removed from society than most, all of these wide open spaces that she was surrounded by really gave her a sense of longing and adventurism that she chased well into her adult years. As a teenager and young adult, Kelli worked mainly as a waitress and bartender at various restaurants all over the place, and she met different types of people and learned all sorts of things about life. People would describe her as sort of a vagabond who moved all over the place, and she would do things impulsively. Like one time she even went to Hawaii, where she decided to stay there for 2 years on impulse. As she grew older, her free-spirited nature never completely went away, but in her mid-30s, when she met her now husband Bill, she did start to settle into more of a routine. Bill was a musician as well as a restaurateur who made Kelli feel really comfortable and gave her the feeling that she no longer needed to run away. She really actually wanted to settle down for probably the first time in her life. So after being together for a while and after a few years of trying, Kelli and Bill eventually fell pregnant with their daughter, Sydney. After giving birth and realizing that she now has this entirely different human being to take care of, Kelli realizes that her lifestyle really isn't suitable or sustainable for a family, and she figures it's probably time to switch it up a little bit. At this point in her life, Kelli was really craving a routine, stability, and safety, and where else could she find that other than the town of Irvine in Southern California, which time and time again has been rated the safest city in America. Although many people will describe Irvine as an overly sterile suburbia where people try way too hard to appear perfect, Kelli felt that it was the perfect place to situate her new family. The views were spectacular, the crime rates were low, the college admission rates were at an all-time high. I mean, what more could a person ask for? For the next several years, Kelli worked as a mortgage lender, and while she raked in a decent amount of money, she really dreaded going to work every day, knowing that she was responsible for such big changes that were occurring in people's lives, and that in turn made her own life a lot less enjoyable. As Sydney grew older, Kelli eventually realized that despite the good amount of money that she was making, the stress that her job as a mortgage lender was putting on her was not worth it, and she would rather quit this career altogether and spend more time with her daughter. So, the best way that Kelli knew how to do this was to become the volunteer director of the after-school program at Sydney's elementary school, Plaza Vista. Kelli dove headfirst into this role, and she really cared about it and felt that it was much more rewarding than her previous career. She absolutely loved it. In addition to her time volunteering at the school, Kelli also owned a small business called Only for the Groovy, where she would sell tie-dyed clothing. Although Kelli's new endeavors didn't quite pay the bills the way her previous career did, she finally felt like she was happy in what she was doing, and that's what mattered above all else. Kelli's free-spirited nature had started to return now that she had ditched the stressful job and was doing what truly made her happy. Not only that, but many students felt the joy and peace that Kelli radiated as she walked down the hallway in her bohemian clothing and her signature peace sign pendant that she wore around her neck. And the students were the only one that absolutely loved Kelli. When she was on after-school duty waiting for parents to pick up their children, she could not bring herself to charge the parents a late fee that the school required whenever they were picking up their students, because she knew that parents couldn't be perfect all of the time, and she just wanted to really sympathize with them and make things a lot easier on everybody. Even though some of the parents of students that attended Plaza Vista could be quite demanding in the name of their child's education, at this point Kelli had basically mastered the art of patience and understanding, and she knew how to deal with any parent that came at her sideways. In addition, Kelli did her very best to pick up the slack for teachers when they were feeling overwhelmed and needed her help. In fact, on the afternoon of February 16th, 2011, that's exactly what Kelli was doing. A karate teacher that afternoon had contacted her saying that he was stuck in traffic and was going to be a little late starting class, and he was wondering if Kelli would be willing and able to go in and start leading the children in their pre-karate stretches, which she happily did. Being the reliable person that Kelli was, she continued to lead this class until a school administrator came to the room and said that the police were waiting in the office for Kelli and that she needed to report there immediately. Upon hearing this, Kelli's heart immediately sank. Her husband Bill had recently transitioned into traveling across the country trying to sell wine to different vendors and restaurants, and she worried that in his travels he might have been involved in some sort of car accident that had left him seriously injured or maybe even dead. She ran to the office in an absolute frenzy, and immediately she met with Officer Shaver, who tried to calm her down and let her know that this had nothing to do with her husband and that her husband was perfectly fine as far as everyone was concerned. The police officer actually informed her that the reason he was there to speak with her is that around 1:15 p.m. he had received a call stating that Kelli was seen driving her PT Cruiser around the elementary school parking lot erratically, and that whoever called was really concerned and needed this matter looked into.
Irvine Police.
Yes, hi. I was calling because my daughter's a student at Plaza Vista Elementary School, and I'm concerned one of the parent volunteers there may be under the influence or using drugs. I was just had to go over to the school, and I saw a car driving very erratically, and as it continued on into the parking lot of the school, and I was going there, and I just had to look to see who it was and what was going on, and then I saw them get out, and it looked like they had put something away in their car and behind their seat with some drugs, and they were all over the place, and then they went into the school, and I recognized that the woman is one of the parent volunteers for the after school program, and I'm concerned that there are drugs at the school.
So you specifically saw her place something behind her seat?
Yeah, it looked like she had some like pills or something.
Okay, what is your name?
My name is Jay.
Jay?
BJ.
And what's your last name?
Chandrasekhar.
How do you spell that?
CHANDRASEKHR.
Okay. And do you know this person's name?
I think her name is Kelli.
Kelli?
Yeah, and it's a white PT Cruiser.
Kelli at this point was dumbfounded, first of all, because she was not driving erratically around the parking lot, and in fact, she'd actually arrived at the school about an hour prior to when this police officer received this report, so she was definitely not in the parking lot, she was not in her car, she was inside the school doing her scholarly duties. The police officer then asked Kelli if she had anything in her car that she shouldn't have, i.e. drugs and alcohol on the school grounds, to which Kelli replied, "Of course not. Go ahead and look." She was very cooperative and thought this must all just be a giant misunderstanding that'll be cleared up in no time because she has nothing to worry about. As the officer led Kelli to her car to begin a search, the pair would be oogled by all sorts of parents and students and teachers, and the situation was just not a good look despite what the outcome was. Anybody who has spent any amount of time in a small and or wealthy community can probably tell you how nosy and gossipy people in these communities can be, and of course having an after-school director being led to her car by a police officer was not a good look. Parents at this elementary school were actually known to get upset about much less, like their kid being exposed to the sun while playing on the playground. What would they have to say about this? As Kelli and the officer arrived at her PT Cruiser, which was parked in the parking lot, it only took a few seconds before Officer Shaver found bags of pills, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia hanging out of the back of the driver's seat pouch. Kelli was in complete shock, understandably, and she immediately said that these drugs had to have been planted in her car. Officer Shaver, at this point, being a police officer and having heard this excuse time and time again, really had no reason to believe that Kelli wasn't responsible for having these drugs in her possession. Knowing that she was completely innocent in this situation, Kelli volunteered to do a field sobriety test, which was completed in one of the extra meeting rooms of the school, and she passed with flying colors. The officer then proceeded to interview several staff of the school who supported the fact that Kelli had arrived at the school around 12:40 that afternoon, which was prior to the 1:15 when the call was made to police reporting the erratic driving in the parking lot. According to the time frame of events, the caller would have had to wait 35 minutes after seeing Kelli in the parking lot to report her erratic behavior, and that really just didn't make much sense. Desperate to do whatever it takes to prove her innocence in this case, Kelli offers to let Officer Shaver and his partner follow her home and search her apartment. The officers would search every square inch of Kelli's family's apartment, searching for drugs, marijuana, pills, drug paraphernalia, and even the little baggies that the pills were found in. After digging through every room, piece of furniture, nook and cranny, police found absolutely no further evidence that Kelli was a user of drugs at all. And on top of that, looking back into her criminal record, it was completely squeaky clean. At this point in the investigation, the dots are really not connecting for Officer Shaver. As I previously mentioned, Irvine is a very safe community that has almost no violent crimes, and the crimes that do take place are narcotics related, such as soccer moms popping Xanax once in a while or teenagers smoking the devil's lettuce. So in Officer Shaver's experience, it wasn't common for drug users to just haphazardly leave their bags of drugs just chilling out in the open. Typically people are more vigilant when hiding their contraband. They'll, slide it under a seat, put it in their glove box, anything other than just leaving it dangling out of the back of their seat. So that, along with the delayed phone call and the school staff corroborating Kelli's story of arriving at the school earlier in the day, he had the feeling that something was definitely up. At this point, Officer Shaver definitely could have arrested Kelli for possession of illicit substances on school grounds, and I feel like that's what most police officers would do, but he had a bit of common sense, which a lot of police officers don't in these cases. But anyways, I really feel like in 99% of similar cases, anybody in Kelli's position would have been immediately arrested, point blank period, no questions asked. But luckily for her this day, Officer Shaver was feeling like he had some common sense, some smarts, 2 brain cells to rub together at least. So he did think to look further into this before just flat out arresting her. So upon just straight up asking Kelli where these drugs could have come from if not from her, Kelli actually admitted that there had been somebody trying to ruin her life for the past year. So at this point in the story, we introduce Jill Easter and her husband Kent, who are both residents of Irvine. They live in a very nice, picturesque, manicured home with a nice lawn. They're just living it up. They were both in their 30s, they were parents of 3, and the two had both received law degrees from very prestigious institutions, Stanford and UCLA. They had met years prior at Palo Alto law firm, where they were both taking on corporate law cases. Much like Kelli Peters, Jill Easter had forewent her career in law to focus on being a more hands-on mother. But unlike Kelli, Jill was much more like the typical Real Housewife of Orange County in the fact that her daily schedule included playdates for her kids, lunch dates for herself, trips to the salon. She had also written a self-published novel about what she had claimed to be the perfect crime. Hint, hint. Meanwhile, her husband supported the family by dedicating much of his time to his successful career as a partner to one of Orange County's top law firms. I guess you could say life was going pretty well for the Easter family. That was until an occurrence that happened in 2010, which left Jill feeling extremely slighted, and she would not let up until she felt that she had won this situation. On February 17th of 2010, Kelli Peters had been placed in charge of leading a group of children from the after-school tennis program through the administration building and to the front of the school where parents would pick up their children. On this particular day, Jill Easter's 6-year-old son had mistakenly been left outside, where he had to wait a few minutes for a teacher to come let him in, and then lead him to be picked up by his mother. Although Kelli Peters explained that she would never purposely leave a child behind, this particular student was kind of known to dilly-dally around and be kind of slow to line up and leave with the rest of the children, so it was an honest mistake when she had led the rest of the class in and didn't notice that this student had been left behind. Peters would apologize repeatedly to Jill Easter and even went to give the boy a hug, and at the end of it all, she thought that the situation had been cleared up. After all, it was an honest mistake. But Jill Easter was not very pleased with this situation whatsoever, and that's putting it lightly. Jill Easter became increasingly angry with Kelli, even stating that it was really suspicious that this male teacher had to be the one to lead her son from the tennis court to the front of the school, and insinuated that something sexually inappropriate may have happened between this teacher and her son, which everybody involved was just like, whoa, where did that come from? Now, as I stated previously, Kelli was used to dealing with overbearing parents, but this situation in particular was getting really out of hand and making her extremely uncomfortable. Not knowing how to continue this conversation in an appropriate and constructive manner, Kelli just decided it would be best to step away. As Kelli proceeded to walk away, Jill made statements very loudly that Kelli was a terrible person, that she didn't know how Kelli could sleep at night knowing the way that she treats people, and she even made a comment that she was going to get Kelli. The following day, Jill Easter went straight to the school saying that she wasn't going to stand for this, and Kelli Peters needed to be fired immediately because she was a danger to the school and to the children. According to Jill, Kelli apparently purposely left her son outside, stating that he was slow and that they just didn't want to wait for him. In Jill's statement, she accuses Kelli of calling her son both physically and mentally slow, which is not what Kelli intended at all. She just meant, hey, your son's kind of messing around a little bit and sometimes he gets left behind. It was an accident. Jill then alleged that her son had to stand outside in the sun for 19 minutes waiting for the door to be opened, and he was just hysterically crying. Kelli was really surprised to be accused of such treatment because she loved her job a lot and she would never purposely mistreat one of her students like this. In fact, Kelli really liked Jill's son. He'd been attending the after-school program for years, and Kelli knew him to be quiet, shy, and she even described him as amazing and said that he was a great artist. Following Jill's accusations, the district conducted an investigation, but ultimately found out that nothing inappropriate had happened to the boy, and that when he had been left outside mistakenly, it was actually for more like 5 minutes and not 19 minutes of him hysterically crying like Jill had stated. Jill was none too pleased with the district's decision, and she would even go as far as contacting the school's principal, saying that her and her husband were both licensed lawyers and that they would take action if it meant keeping children out of harm's way in regards to Kelli and her mistreatment of students. And it didn't stop there. Easter would go up to parents in the parking lot or at events or activities, telling other parents that they should keep an eye out for Kelli, that she was dangerous and she could hurt their children. And Jill even went as far as saying she wanted to make bumper stickers speaking out against Kelli. She would not stop until Kelli lost her job at Plaza Vista. In all of her years of working at Plaza Vista, Kelli had never been met with such vitriol and hatred, and she was really taken aback by this harassment campaign and didn't know how to handle it. Kelli even offered to resign, but the principal knew what a valuable asset she was to the school and to the after-school program, and that Kelli would never intentionally act maliciously against a student. It's probably at this point where if Jill Easter was a reasonable person and this had been going on for a few months with nothing really happening, then she would probably let up on Kelli and move on to the next talk of the town. But Jill Easter is not a reasonable person. After attempting to file both a civil lawsuit as well as a restraining order against Kelli for stalking and harassment, yeah, I know, I think it should be more like the other way around, but the Easters were not happy when these matters were thrown out of court for lack of evidence. In order to maintain some sort of professionalism in this very odd situation, Plaza Vista agreed to waive the Easters' tuition for the after-school program, and they also made a new policy where teachers were responsible for doing a head count each time that the students were released from the after-school program to their parents. Still, Kelli Peters remained a very much well-liked asset to the after-school program, and she even went on to become the president of the Parent-Teacher Association. Even though Jill and Kent received something out of the situation, which I believe is more than they deserved, they were still not satisfied. Jill had spent so much of her time and effort trying to get Kelli fired, and when it didn't happen, she felt that she just had to keep going until she got her way. So the following year, upon having this conversation with the police officer about how these drugs ended up in her car, Kelli realized it was probably no coincidence that it was occurring exactly 1 year after the anniversary of this tennis court incident. Police believe this planting was much more likely the work of this strange man who lived across from the school campus and was known for coming on the grounds and doing really strange things like wearing Batman costumes, yelling at the staff, and taking pictures of students in the crosswalk without permission. This strange man had actually mentioned wanting to become the PTA president before, so police believed maybe this was a motive for why he would plant drugs in efforts to get Kelli arrested and free up the position that he so badly wanted for some reason. Basically, police believe that this random crazy dude who does strange things is much more likely to be responsible for planting drugs in somebody's car than these two lawyers who have this seemingly perfect family and have better things to do than be planting drugs in somebody's car. But when taking a look back at the original call to police, they noticed that something's off. First off, the caller stated that their name was Vijay
Chandrasekhar,
and that they had a student at the school, but upon going back into the records and looking for anybody with this last name, they could find no evidence that this person had a student going to Plaza Vista. Police also found that the caller sounded extremely nervous because they were stuttering, and it sounded like they were reading off of a script because they were giving a lot more information than a person typically would when they're just making your standard police report. In addition, he also weirdly switched to this strange foreign accent about halfway through the call, meaning that he was likely trying to disguise his voice. Diving even deeper into this very strange call, police trace it back to a very fancy business office in a hotel in Newport Beach. After reviewing the CCTV footage captured by security cameras, police see that around the time the call was made, a tall, lanky man in a business suit was seen entering the building. Now, this man seen on the security footage most definitely did not fit the description of Kelli's PTA president rival, but he did look a whole lot like Jill Easter's husband, Kent, who just so happened to work across the street in a high-rise building. So with this bit of information, police can finally start looking a little deeper into the Easter family. It turns out that the Easter family household is only located about 1 mile away from Kelli Peters' apartment. In the very early hours of the morning that those drugs had been found in Kelli Peters' car, Kent's phone was actually found to have pinged off of the cell phone tower nearest to her apartment around 2 to 4 a.m. that morning. At this point, police feel like they pretty much have enough evidence to close in on the Easters, but seeing that Jill and Kent are both very intelligent and educated, especially on legal matters, they're afraid that the two might refuse to speak forthright, or they might even manipulate the situation in their favor. I'm sure you can see where this case is going at this point, so I think we can all agree that these two were not quite as bright as everyone originally thought. Because come on now, you're both lawyers in the year of 2011, and you don't realize that things such as security camera footage and phone call tracing are possible? Like, let's be so for real right now. So on March 4th, 2011, police would approach Kent Easter as he was entering his office building in Newport, and they basically just asked him, hey, do you know of anything going on at Plaza Elementary right now? Because they don't want to let him know that they know that he knows that they know. Kent was cooperative at first, saying that a year prior, he and his wife had to file a complaint with the school against a member of the staff for mistreating their son, but it was basically water under the bridge, and he wasn't aware of anything else going on at Plaza Vista at the time. When officers questioned if Kent knew anything about Kelli Peters, he immediately went cold and saying that he'd never met her and he couldn't pick her out in a crowd. Other than hearing her name before, he basically said he knew nothing about the lady. Police come to the point where they're pretty positive that Kent isn't gonna be truthful or forthcoming with any information past this point, so they tell him, look buddy, we've been following you and we know something's up. They tell Kent that they know that his phone pinged near a cell phone tower near Kelli's apartment right before drugs were planted in her car, and they were pretty sure if they tested the DNA on the drugs, they know who it would lead back to. Kent is pretty much shaking in his fancy little business shoes at this point, much like he was when he was making that fake police report saying that Kelli was driving around the parking lot erratically, and he stops talking and he says, you know what, I am a lawyer, but I want to speak to a lawyer because I'm not speaking to you. And that's probably about the first and last time that Kent smartened up in this situation. So this is usually the point where cases slow down a little bit, because when somebody asks for a lawyer, the police cannot legally continue to question this person until the lawyer is present. But luckily for the police officers, they came ready that day and they had search warrants ready to go. So after searching Kent's car right then and there, they just so happened to find some diet pills in his center console, which were sealed in a tiny little plastic Ziploc baggie, and just so happened to be the exact same brand and size as the ones that were found in Kelli Peters' car. Later on, DNA analysis would reveal that Jill had touched both the drugs and the paraphernalia that were found in Kelli's car. Police were able to search Kent's office through a little bit of a loophole, because usually police can't just go riling through lawyers' things knowing that there's a bunch of confidential information in there having to do with their clients and unrelated matters. So luckily they were able to find a volunteer lawyer who could legally go in there and find any evidence and hand it over to police. Police also wanted to conduct thorough searches of both Jill and Kent's cell phones, but seeing as Kent had client attorney privilege as well as spousal privilege with Jill, this became a bit of a problem. Police just couldn't go and look through their phones all willy-nilly like they would a normal person. So it was a little while later when police were staked outside of the Easter's residence in Irvine when they would inadvertently unveil a little bit of tea, and it was piping hot. Normally in the types of videos I make, I wouldn't want to, make light of situations, but seeing as this is kind of a revenge being served type thing that's not as serious, I think we can all just bask in the entertainment that is Jill Easter's absurdity along with her husband. So police noticed this man walking down the sidewalk in front of the Easter household, who turns out to be a man named Glenn Gomez, who is a firefighter for the Los Angeles County Fire Department. So as he's taking a walk down the sidewalk on his way to the Easter household, he notices that there are police cars parked against the street, staking it out, and he gets freaked out. So he does a 180 pivot and heads right back to his car. Only a few moments later, Jill was seen stepping out of her house very scantily clad in a sheer robe, when she also noticed that there was police officers staked outside of her house. So she as well does a pivot and runs back in her house as fast as she can. So while Jill's out here telling all sorts of lies about Kelli, she's here running her own scandal. Jill, those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So as soon as this firefighter Glenn gets back to his truck and is getting ready to pull off, police stop him and ask, what's going on here? What were you doing just then, walking into Jill's house? Glenn explains who he is, that he works for the Los Angeles Fire Department, and he had just driven 50 miles to come see his lover, Jill Easter, who is just the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. This affair had been happening for 2.5 years. Upon looking further into Glenn and his involvement in this, police actually found out that he really wasn't involved at all, but they saw this as an opportunity to get him on their side to help take Jill down. Glenn was hesitant at first because he really did love Jill, but police were basically like, look, she's not a good person, and she'll take you down with her if she had the chance. If roles were reversed, she would not have your back. So, come to the dark side and work with us. So on March 23rd, Glenn's curiosity for what was happening with his love partner, as well as his want to show police that he had nothing to do with this, he agreed to wear a wire when meeting up with Jill. That day, Jill brought her 2 youngest children to a nearby park where she met up with Glenn, and she told her kids that he was just the park ranger and that they were just good old friends. Go on and play on the playground because me and my friend here are just going to have some friendly conversation. So as the kids go off to play, Glenn Glenn explains that the police have been questioning him and they won't exactly tell him what's going on, and he just wants to get the truth from Jill and find out what is happening. Jill explains that there was a little bit of trouble going on that could get Kent fired from his job, but she doesn't really want to go into details about it. And I just want to say, aw, how nice of Jill to keep her husband into consideration when she's bringing her young children to a public park to meet her affair partner. Although I'm 99% sure that she's worried about the effect that Kent's losing his job will have on her lifestyle, rather than, Kent losing everything he's worked hard for over the years to become this big successful lawyer. They're both kind of horrible people, so I can't really feel too bad, Anyways, Glenn goes on to tell Jill that while he really loves her and everything, he thinks it would be best for them to take some distance since the spotlight is coming closer and closer to exposing Jill, and he really doesn't want to be caught in those crosshairs when everything comes out in the open. Unsurprisingly, like many things, Jill did not take this too well. Her life was beginning to crumble around her, and if Glenn really loved her the way he said he did, he should be there to stand beside her and back her up. She starts making underhanded comments to Glenn, saying how she needs someone to come and save her like in the movies, and she thought she had that with Glenn, but clearly she doesn't, because he's just abandoning her. Glenn tells Jill that he believes that she's a good person, and if she really has nothing to hide like she says she does, then everything should be perfectly fine, right? But this makes Jill even angrier, and she begins yelling at Glenn and just saying that he can't do this to her and that she won't survive this. Now, Glenn's never seen this manipulative side of Jill directed at him anyways, so at this point he decides he can't take it anymore and he just calls it quits. Jill goes absolutely nuts, and she goes as far as sending a letter to Glenn's wife. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention he's also married, having an affair. But Jill sends a letter to his wife's work detailing the affair in its entirety, but writing it from a third person point of view, trying to make it look like one of her friends or something wrote it and sent it. But then she also goes on to show up to his home in Long Beach and tell the wife in person about everything. She went nuts. So at this point, police are feeling real good about the evidence they have against the Easters, but there's just one tiny problem. Since Jill and Kent's phones weren't able to be thoroughly searched, as I mentioned earlier, a volunteer lawyer had to sit down and sift through tens of thousands of messages for over 8 months. This volunteer lawyer put in countless hours going through all of these texts and emails, but after all, he had his own practice too, and he couldn't put it on the back burner forever. He had to eventually give it up after 8 months, and at this point it would be handed over to the district attorney's office, who would continue to scour through these tens of thousands of text messages and emails and all of this correspondence. Frustratingly enough, the district attorneys actually found out that the messages that had been sent between Kent and Jill on that morning when the drugs were planted in Kelly's car had been deleted before Kent even turned the phone over. So after a year of waiting for these text messages to be uncovered and finally tie up all the loose ends of this case, police just hit a dead end. Keep in mind at this point that over 20 detectives have been assigned to this case, which is pretty odd considering it didn't even involve any sort of violence or putting anybody in imminent danger. Police officers in Orange County are used to dealing with all sorts of white-collar crime, like financial issues and maybe the minor drug infraction, but while I am glad police were able to thoroughly investigate this case, I just find it interesting that people in lower or even middle class communities almost never get this type of police involvement, even in serious and dangerous crimes, but I digress. During this time, Kelli Peters was still living in constant fear, knowing that Jill was still out there trying to get her. She worried that Jill would plant drugs in her car again. She dreaded seeing Jill at school pickup and drop off, and she was even worried that Jill might break into her house and harm her or her family when they were just walking down the street. Being under such constant stress, Kelli began losing that really sweet and carefree personality that people had loved her for. She started losing her hair, withdrawing from social situations, and her patience understandably grew very thin. Still, fellow parents and teachers tried to support Kelli and show her love the best that they could, telling her that this would all blow over and that she had nothing to worry about because they knew the type of person that she really was despite these accusations. Kelli had deliberately moved to America's safest city in efforts to protect her family, but now she was living in an absolute nightmare. Even her daughter Sydney was suffering the consequences of these accusations. She couldn't sleep at night for fear that somebody was going to come into her house and harm her, and she really just stopped having a lot of friends at school and withdrew and isolated into her own bubble. Kelli tried to help Sydney in every way that she knew how, trying to encourage other kids to include Sydney in their friend groups, and even went as far as scheduling an appointment with the school therapist for Sydney. But none of these efforts would really work, and Sydney even got to the point where she begged to be taken out of school. Finally, in spring of 2012, Christopher Duff from the DA's Special Prosecutions Unit decided that with even out the text messages from Kent and Jill's phones, he could still have them arrested and charged with planting these drugs in Kelli's car. The Easters had both hired very successful attorneys who had advised them that if they were to be arrested, there would definitely be a notice in advance so that the couple could go down to the police station and turn themselves in, rather than having a whole humiliating scene being caused where they're being arrested, potentially in public. But later that summer, things didn't quite go down the way that they had planned. Knowing that court records are fairly public and that the Easters have special insight on legal matters, police were able to obtain arrest warrants without uploading them to the online database so that Kent and Jill would have no idea that they were about to be arrested. Jill was arrested at their home in Irvine, and Kent was arrested in Newport Beach on his way to his law office. They were both charged with conspiracy to plant drugs, but of course, having a large amount of money and being successful, they made bail very quickly after, in which they were released. Just as quickly as they had bailed themselves out and tried to sweep this whole situation under the rug, they couldn't hide it because their mugshots were all over the place. News sites, television, newspapers, everybody knew about it. Kent would then lose his position at this very top prestigious law firm in Orange County, along with his $400,000 salary. In the following months, both Jill and Kent would both be issued felony indictments, which threatened both of their licenses to practice law. Although Jill was the mastermind behind this whole plot, things were really hitting the fan for Kent. He'd been the one caught on CCTV footage making this false police report. His phone was the one pinging off of the cell tower near Kelli's apartment, and he was the one who was actively using his law degree, so this was really just threatening his entire livelihood and career, the one that, went into supporting Jill and their children. Jill would end up taking the blame for planting the drugs, hoping that her and her husband could be tried separately so that she could speak on defense of her husband and therefore have the chance of being acquitted. Luckily, the judge was really not having it this day, so he determined that Jill and Kent would be tried together. The following year, just before trial, Jill Easter would plead guilty to a felony count of false imprisonment by deceit or fraud, to which she was sentenced 60 days in jail along with 100 hours of community service at the local soup kitchen. In addition, Jill could never practice law again, but this probably isn't really much off of her back, considering that she hadn't used her law degree in years and probably wasn't really planning on using it again. During Kent's trial, his defense attorney would state that Kent was actually a really good person, but he was just stuck in this toxic marriage with Jill, who wore the pants in the relationship, and Kent just didn't have the backbone to stand up to her. He even claimed that Kent was aware of Jill's cheating, but he felt that it was his duty as a husband to stay in the marriage and support the family no matter what. They presented countless emails to the jury and to the court of Jill sending demands to Kent through his email, as well as saying that Kelli Peters needs to be brought down. According to Kent, Jill was 100% the reason that his life had gone this way and the reason that his life was basically over from this point on. When it came to the fact that Kent's phone was the one pinging near Kelli's apartment, he stated that there was a simple misunderstanding. He had been asleep that night when Jill just decided to switch out their phones and go and plant the drugs herself. And later that day, Jill had called Kent saying that Kelli was driving erratically around the parking lot, and for some reason he needed to be the one to call it into police, even though he didn't witness it or have anything to do with it. And Kent says when he made this call, he felt such a need to just get his wife off of his back and do what he needed to do to be a strong husband, that he came up with this fake Indian accent which mimicked one of his neighbors. During the trial, Christopher Duff pointed out the extremely unlikely fact that if Jill were having so many affairs, she probably wouldn't be so quick to switch out her and her husband's phone in the middle of the night, just, leaving it open for him to find out what she's doing behind his back. At the end of it all, Kent was found guilty by the jury and he was sentenced to the same thing that Jill received, 60 days in jail along with 100 hours of community service. Upon hearing this news, Jill, once again in true Jill fashion, tells Kent that he should actually consider just killing himself so that she can get his $500,000 life insurance policy and take care of their kids. Oh, how I wish I had the nerve to say some of the things that this woman has coming out of her mouth. So obviously Kent was like, "Are you literally insane? I'm not killing myself over a 60-day jail sentence so that you can have my life insurance money." Jill suggested that the two take the kids and run away to Belize, and she even suggested that maybe she should be the one to kill herself. Seeing how truly crazy his wife really can be, Kent decides to proceed with divorcing Jill, in which ends up in a very messy custody battle where Jill states that Kent is extremely aggressive and he can't take care of himself, he's angry, he's a drunk, he's not stable, and that she should get full custody of their 3 children. In February 2016, after Jill and Kent have both served their 60-day sentences in community service, all of that's cleared up, Kelli Peters decides, "You people have done enough damage to me over these past few years of my life, and you know what, I want retribution for the distress and the damages that you have done to me and my family." During these court proceedings, Jill and Kent of course keep up their charade of being these great and loving people. They couldn't quite explain still to this day what exactly happened that day that the drugs were planted, but they just said, you know, sorry. Despite mentioning to the court several times how they were no longer in the same financial situation that they once were, the jury would determine that Jill and Kent Easter were to pay $5.7 million in damages. Hallelujah, Kelly, praise the Lord. Kent continues to try to bring this case back to court, stating that the damages were excessive and that there's no way that he's going to be able to pay this amount of money, but he really is just going nowhere with it. The Easters also attempted to get rid of several of their assets, such as their $2 million home in Irvine, so that they could somehow escape paying the money that they legally owe to Kelly, and it's all just a huge mess. Shortly after, both Jill and Kelly actually decided to go on the Dr. Phil show, and things, as you can expect, ended quite badly for Jill. I'm not quite sure what she expected to happen, if she was just gonna like try and plead her case again and people were gonna be on her side or just brush it off, but the entire audience was very much against Jill, even Dr. Phil going as far as being like, "What is wrong with you? Like, seriously, what is wrong with you?" Ever since this seemingly never-ending nightmare has been put to rest, Kelly is really just out here living her best life. While she'll probably never get the $5.7 million that she's legally owed, at least she can walk around her neighborhood now knowing that both Jill and Kent have separately moved to the next town over, Newport Beach, and are at least farther enough away to like not mess with her anymore. So I gotta give it up to Kelly for sticking it out like this, because it would be infinitely easy to just up and move and relocate to somewhere where people don't know your name, they don't know your situation, but Kelly really wanted to keep a stable and safe environment for her daughter, who is in high school at this time. So she said, at least for now, she's planning on staying put because she feels safe, and this is just the right place for her to be at this point in her life. Jill and Kent have both relocated to Newport Beach, as I previously stated, and I believe Jill is actually remarried now, but Kent has said that he's had a hard time dating because it's pretty hard to form meaningful relationships when a quick Google search of your name shows all of the messed up things that you've done. So well, if it isn't the consequences of your actions. Well, guys, that just about wraps up today's case. I hope you found it a little refreshing and on the lighter side after some of the heavy topics we've been covering. Quick reminder that if you do have any recommendations for future videos you'd like me to cover, go ahead and leave those topics down below in the comments, and I will get to them as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!